The screech of metal reverberated through the hull as the Vanguard took another hit. Sparks flew from overhead panels, the ship shuddering under the assault. Captain Elena Vasquez gripped the armrest of her command chair, knuckles white. The bridge was a cacophony of alarms and desperate voices, but her gaze remained fixed on the flickering holo display in front of her. The red blip of the Zarkan Predator's ship loomed closer, relentless. "They're almost on us, Captain!" shouted Lieutenant Harris, his voice edged with panic. The young officer's fingers danced over the controls, trying to coax more speed from the failing engines. "We can't outrun them!" Vasquez took a deep breath, her mind racing. The Zarkans were ruthless hunters, their ship a sleek, deadly shadow designed for one purpose: to annihilate anything in its path. The Vanguard was a science vessel, not built for combat, and they were light years from any help. Running was no longer an option. "Helm, bring us about," Vasquez ordered, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. The crew looked at her in disbelief, but she held their gaze. "We're not going to run. We're going to fight." Harris hesitated, then nodded, swallowing hard. The ship groaned as it began to turn, bringing its battered side to face the enemy. Vasquez's eyes narrowed. The Zarkans would never expect a human ship to challenge them head-on. They had relied on fear and overwhelming force to subjugate weaker species, but humanity had something they didn't: the ability to adapt. "Activate the EMP charge," Vasquez commanded. The Vanguard carried a single experimental electromagnetic pulse, designed to disable electronics in a wide radius. It was their last, desperate card. Chief Engineer Patel's voice crackled over the comms. "EMP is primed, Captain, but it'll knock us out too. We'll be sitting ducks." "I know," Vasquez replied. "But if we time it right, we'll be the last duck standing." She leaned forward, eyes locked on the Zarkan ship. It was close now, its dark hull shimmering with malevolent energy. "On my mark!" The crew held their breath, the tension on the bridge thick enough to cut. Vasquez waited, watching the Zarkan ships approach. She needed to be precise. Too soon, and they'd recover before the Vanguard could react. Too late, and it would be over in a flash of plasma. "Now!" she shouted. The Vanguard bucked as the EMP detonated. For a heartbeat, everything went silent. The lights flickered, died. The hum of the engine ceased, leaving only the hollow echo of their breathing. The Zarkan ship drifted in the void, its predatory momentum lost, systems offline. Vasquez could almost feel the collective shock of the enemy crew, unthinkable that prey could turn predator. "Restart the engines," she ordered into the darkness. "We've got one shot at this." Seconds stretched into an eternity before the Vanguard shuddered back to life. Power flickered across the consoles, dim but steady. The Zarkans were still reeling, but it wouldn't last long. Vasquez stood, her voice cold and clear. "Target their weapons array. Fire everything we have." Harris nodded, his earlier fear replaced by determination. The Vanguard's weapons were minimal, designed for defense, but they would have to be enough. The first salvo streaked through the black, tearing into the Zarkan ship's exposed flank. Explosions rippled along the enemy hull, severing power conduits, shattering armor plates. The Zarkans stirred, their systems beginning to reboot. Vasquez could see it on the holo display, fractured, but still deadly. "We won't get another chance," she murmured half to herself. The final volley left the Vanguard's tubes, a desperate, defiant strike. It hit the Zarkan ship dead center, splitting it in two. The enemy vessel detonated in a blinding flash, debris scattering into the void. Silence fell over the bridge as the light faded. The crew stared at the display, unable to believe what they'd just done. Vasquez exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. "Status report. Enemy ship destroyed," Harris said, voice trembling. "We did it, Captain." Vasquez nodded, her expression unreadable. "Send a signal to Fleet Command. Tell them the Zarkans aren't invincible." She allowed herself a small, grim smile. "And tell them we're still here." The Vanguard limped through the darkness, scarred but victorious. They had faced the predator and lived. But Vasquez knew the Zarkans would come again, and next time, they'd be ready. For now, though, humanity had shown its teeth, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Vanguard drifted through the void, its once sleek hull now marred by battle scars. Inside, the tension was palpable. The bridge was a hive of controlled chaos as the crew worked to assess the damage and restore full functionality. Despite the recent victory, a heavy silence hung over them, a silence born from the knowledge that they had survived by the slimmest of margins. Captain Vasquez stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes scanning the damage reports scrolling across her console. The ship had held together, but just barely. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. "We've got extensive damage to the aft section," Chief Engineer Patel reported, her voice strained. "Engines are operating at 30%. It'll take hours to get them back to full capacity, if we even have the parts." "Do what you can, Chief," Vasquez replied. "We need to be ready to move at a moment's notice." Lieutenant Harris looked up from his station, concern etched on his face. "Captain, I'm picking up a faint distress signal. It's human, but it's weak, probably coming from a damaged escape pod." Vasquez's brow furrowed. An escape pod meant survivors, possibly from another ship ambushed by the Zarkans. But it could also be a trap. The Zarkans were known to lure their prey with false signals. She couldn't risk the crew's safety on a hunch. "Can you trace it?" Vasquez asked, her voice tight. Harris nodded, fingers flying across the controls. "It's coming from within a nearby asteroid field. Looks like the pod's beacon is barely functional." Patel glanced up from her work, concern shadowing her features. "That field is dense, Captain. Navigating through it would be risky, especially in our condition." Vasquez weighed the options. They couldn't ignore the signal. It could be their only chance to gain intelligence on the Zarkans or even save lives. But she also couldn't afford to cripple the Vanguard any further. She made her decision. "Set a course for the asteroid field," she ordered. "But proceed with caution. We're not going to lose this ship after everything we've been through." As the Vanguard altered its course, the bridge crew worked with focused intensity. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a labyrinth of spinning rocks and debris. The ship's thrusters fired in short, controlled bursts, guiding them through the treacherous terrain. Every groan of the hull sent a shiver through the crew, but Vasquez's expression remained steely. "Captain," Harris called out, his voice tense. "I've got visual on the pod. It's heavily damaged, but I'm reading life signs, faint, but there. Prepare to bring it aboard," Vasquez instructed. "And keep an eye out for anything unusual. The Zarkans might be lurking." As the Vanguard drew closer to the pod, the tension on the bridge ratcheted up another notch. The pod was barely holding together, its exterior scorched and pitted. A crew member initiated the tractor beam, locking onto the pod and guiding it into the hangar. The process was nerve-wrackingly slow, each second dragging as they waited for some hidden threat to reveal itself. Finally, the pod settled in the hangar with a heavy thud. Vasquez exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Harris, take a team down there and see what we've got. Be careful." Harris nodded and hurried off the bridge, a squad of security personnel following closely behind. Vasquez watched him go, her mind racing with possibilities. Whoever, or whatever, was inside that pod could change everything. Minutes later, Harris's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, you're going to want to see this." Vasquez's stomach tightened at the tone in his voice. She made her way to the hangar, the weight of impending revelation heavy in the air. The hatch of the pod had been forced open, and inside lay a single survivor, an alien, but not Zarkan. It was humanoid, with pale skin and large, black eyes, dressed in tattered human military garb. The implications hit Vasquez like a hammer. This was no ordinary alien, it was a hybrid, the result of Zarkan experiments on captured humans. The Zarkans weren't just hunting, they were harvesting. The crew exchanged uneasy glances as the realization sank in. The Zarkans were more than a threat, they were an existential nightmare. And now, with this discovery, humanity had a new, terrifying enemy to face. Vasquez's voice was hard as steel. "Get it to the medbay. We need answers." As the crew moved to comply, Vasquez stared down at the hybrid, her mind racing. They had won a battle, but this was a war on a scale they had never imagined. And now, more than ever, they needed to survive long enough to warn the rest of humanity. The gathering storm was only just beginning. The hum of the medbay's equipment filled the air as Captain Vasquez stepped inside. The alien hybrid lay on the examination table, its chest rising and falling in slow, shallow breaths. Despite its human features, there was something unnervingly wrong about it, an unsettling blend of familiar and alien that made her skin crawl. Dr. Langley hovered nearby, running diagnostics with grim determination. "What's the status, Doc?" Vasquez asked, keeping her voice steady. Langley glanced up, her face pale beneath the harsh medical lights. "It's stable for now. Physiology is mostly human, but there are clear signs of genetic manipulation. The Zarkans did a number on this one." Vasquez clenched her fists. The Zarkans had been harvesting humans to create these abominations, tools for their conquest. "Can it talk?" Langley hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. The vocal cords are intact, and I've administered a stimulant. It should regain consciousness any moment now." As if on cue, the hybrid's eyes fluttered open. Black, soulless orbs met Vasquez's gaze, and for a moment either moved. Then, the creature tried to sit up, but the restraints held it in place. It struggled briefly, then relaxed, studying its surroundings with unnerving calm. "Where am I?" The voice was a rasping whisper, tinged with something inhuman. "You're aboard the Vanguard," Vasquez replied, her tone firm. "We found you in an escape pod. What are you, and what were the Zarkans doing to you?" The hybrid's expression flickered with something, pain, perhaps, or confusion. "I was human once. They took me, changed me, made me into this." It looked down at its hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "They call us harvesters. We are their weapons." Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. "Weapons for what?" "To break your kind. To infiltrate, to learn, to destroy from within." The hybrid's voice grew more desperate. "But I resisted. I escaped. That's why you found me." Langley stepped forward, her voice gentle. "If you want to help us, we need more information. What are the Zarkans planning?" The hybrid closed its eyes, as if searching its fractured memories. "They're gathering their forces. A full invasion, soon. The harvesters, we were the first wave. They've been testing your defenses, probing for weaknesses." Vasquez's mind raced. A full-scale invasion, this was the nightmare scenario, and they were dangerously unprepared. "How much time do we have?" "Not long," the hybrid whispered. "Days, maybe weeks. They're already moving." The medbay door hissed open, and Lieutenant Harris entered, his face tight with urgency. "Captain, we've got a problem. Long-range scanners are picking up multiple Zarkan signatures. They're closing in on our position." Vasquez's heart pounded. It was too soon. They hadn't even had time to repair the ship, let alone warn the fleet. "How many?" "Too many," Harris replied grimly. "And they're moving fast." The hybrid's eyes snapped open, panic flashing across its face. "They found me. They're here to finish what they started." Vasquez's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the Vanguard was barely holding together. But she refused to let fear take hold. "Harris, get us to full alert. Patel, divert all power to the engines and shields. We're not going down without a fight." The crew sprang into action, the bridge erupting with activity. Vasquez turned back to the hybrid. "If you want to live, you need to help us. What can you tell us about their tactics?" The hybrid hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of resolve in its dark eyes. "They rely on fear, on overwhelming force. But if you hit them hard and fast, disrupt their formation, you can buy time." "Then that's what we'll do," Vasquez said. "We've beaten them once, we can do it again." As the ship braced for battle, Vasquez felt a surge of determination. The odds were stacked against them, but they had something the Zarkans didn't: humanity's indomitable will to survive. They had to hold the line, no matter the cost. Outside, the void darkened as the Zarkan fleet closed in, a swarm of death that threatened to snuff out their last hope. The Vanguard's engines roared to life, and with a defiant lurch, the ship accelerated toward the enemy. The battle was about to begin, and this time, there would be no retreat. The Vanguard trembled as it barreled through space, the Zarkan fleet closing in from all sides. The bridge was a frenzy of activity, the crew working with frantic precision. Captain Vasquez stood at the center, her gaze fixed on the viewscreen displaying the approaching enemy ships. Each second felt like an eternity as the void outside darkened with the Zarkan armada. "Enemy vessels in range!" Patel called out from the tactical station, his fingers flying across the console. "They're deploying fighters, hundreds of them. Bring up the forward shields and charge the main cannons," Vasquez ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We hit them hard, right between the eyes." The hybrid, now fully conscious and unrestrained, stood beside her, a tense expression on its face. "You won't survive a frontal assault. The Zarkans excel at direct combat. You need to outthink them, not outfight them." Vasquez glanced at the hybrid, weighing its words. It had proven itself trustworthy so far, but this was the moment of truth. "What's your suggestion?" "Disrupt their formation," the hybrid replied, its voice urgent. "They're relying on their numbers and discipline. If you can break their coordination, they'll fall into chaos." A plan began to form in Vasquez's mind. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. "Harris, target the lead ships and fire at will. We're going to punch a hole right through their lines." Harris nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Aye, Captain." Firing all batteries. The ship's cannons roared to life, unleashing a torrent of energy that slammed into the Zarkan vanguard. Explosions blossomed in the darkness, tearing through the enemy's ranks. For a brief moment, the Zarkan formation wavered, their tightly controlled advance faltering. "Now, full speed ahead!" Vasquez shouted. "Ram through the gap and don't stop until we're clear." The vanguard surged forward, engines blazing as it cut through the breach in the Zarkan line. Enemy ships scrambled to regroup, but the chaos was spreading. Without their rigid formation, the Zarkans struggled to react to the sudden change in tactics. Patel's voice rang out, filled with both relief and tension. "We're through, but they're regrouping fast. We won't get another chance like this." Vasquez knew he was right. The Zarkans were already closing the gap, their fighters swarming like angry hornets. They had bought themselves a sliver of time, but it wasn't enough. "Not yet." "Hybrid," she said, turning to the creature beside her. "You said to use fear as a weapon. How do we turn that against them?" The hybrid hesitated, then spoke with quiet determination. "Their leaders control the fleet from the rear. If you take out the command ships, the rest will scatter. But it's a suicide run." Vasquez's jaw tightened. She had expected as much. "We don't have a choice. Patel, set course for the command vessels. Maximum speed." The hybrid watched her with something like respect in its eyes. "You're willing to risk everything to stop them?" Vasquez met its gaze, her voice unwavering. "Humanity's survival is worth any price." The vanguard streaked toward the enemy's heart, dodging laser fire and weaving through the chaos. The Zarkan command ships loomed ahead, massive and imposing, their weapons bristling with deadly energy. Every instinct screamed at Vasquez to turn back, but she pressed on. "Prepare for impact," she ordered, gripping the edge of her console. "All hands brace yourselves." The ships shook violently as they plowed through the enemy's defenses. The command ship's hulls loomed closer, filling the view screen. In those final moments, the bridge was filled with an eerie calm, an acceptance of what was to come. Then, with a deafening roar, the vanguard collided with the lead command ship. The explosion lit up the void, a blinding flash that consumed everything in its path. As the light faded, the Zarkan fleet wavered, then crumbled. Leaderless and disoriented, the remaining ships scattered, fleeing into the darkness. Vasquez's voice echoed in the silence, calm and resolute. "We did it." The vanguard was battered, but it still stood, a testament to humanity's unyielding will. Against all odds, they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious.